Hello, my name is Deb Bryant, and I'm happy to welcome you to my session on creating authentic value with open source. I thought I'd take a couple of minutes before I started in through the presentation itself to introduce myself, give you a little bit of my background to help you understand the context for my comments and my viewpoints. I have been involved with open source, I think about 25 years now. In the mid to late 90s, I was running an internet company in the Wild West days of internet when no one had anything like billing systems in place and everything was pretty experimental. We acquired a small company in Hawaii that came with it a lot of exuberant and talented staff, including a half a dozen self-taught Unix programmers. One 19-year-old came to me one evening and asked if he could participate in a project on company time. Very excited. We sat outside of the fire escape on the 14th floor of an office building in downtown Portland, which is why I remember the conversation very well, because we couldn't get outside in those startup days and be able to come back in the front door with the security in place. At any rate, we had a great, very animated conversation around something called Linux, what he thought it held in store for really radically changing the way people work with operating systems and also how they were able to collaborate on projects. So how could I say no? Me, the middle manager. I spent a number of years and ensuing years actually becoming quite involved in the industry. I left telecom and internet when there was an incredible meltdown, an Enron-esque implosion in the industry, and later it again in the dot-com bust. I spent some time then in the public sector doing one of the most difficult jobs I ever had in state government as their deputy state CAO. And it was during that time that I was asked to review a piece of legislation that suggested we should make open source a policy for the state of Oregon. Well, to make a long story short, it was a horribly written bill, but I got to learn a lot about open source communities, and I met everyone that had a stake and an interest, and thus became my permanent career in open source and using everything I learned to date to help build communities and support them, including some time at Oregon State University's open source lab, which was a real immersion experience. Along the way, I became to really value open source, not just pragmatically as a way to reduce costs and operations or to collaborate on projects that might be specific, for an example, in the public sector, but also vast opportunities in humanitarian efforts and aid with first responders. And I had the luxury of spending a number of years just focusing on helping those communities rise. They really didn't have a great commercial interest, but always needed a model for sustainability. Today, I am the Senior Director of the Open Source Program Office at Red Hat. I have the best job, I think, in the company. Don't tell my boss. He may think he does. But I'm coming to talk to you a bit about Red Hat's experience as exemplary in terms of thinking through how you contribute and participate in community, and also the authentic value you bring to customers who sometimes are engaged in open source directly and others are working side by side with us. So with that, I'm going to shift to recording the presentation. Give me a moment and I'll see you around the corner. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about creating authentic value with open source. And by that, I mean for your own organization, for your customers, and for the community you participate in. Now, I'm going to take a minute to explain Red Hat and what business we're in so we can be clear there. Red Hat is an enterprise software company that uses open source as its development methodology. Sometimes people refer to us as having an open source business model, but to be clear, there are no open source business models. There's software development. There are business models that include software development as part of its strategy, but it's really important not to conflate the two, especially when you start to talk about licenses. Red Hat's business model then is to provide customers with service that support, train, and provide innovation that's relevant to the customer based on open source developed software. So we bring the benefits of open source, all the flexibility, lack of vendor lock-in, scalability, all the things that are beautiful about open source, and we deliver that to a customer in a way that's easier for them to consume and maintain and such. Now, there's an expression we use called upstream first. It's our engineering slogan, but it's also our philosophy and our policy and our practice. All of our software development happens in the upstream. So the rest of the community also shares in the benefits of the addition. It's something we do consistently. We've done this software this way for nearly 30 years now. So I'm going to talk a bit about how the company drives value from open source software while it's working in the upstream. First of all, community growth is incredibly important to us. Strong communities create a stable product line. Most of Red Hat's customers are very large companies, and they rely on these long-term stable releases so they can build their own technology roadmap on it. So the important thing is to make sure we're also not just maximizing adoption, but contributing to the sustainability of the community for its long-term growth and longevity. The second thing that is important to us and way we drive value is that by participating in the community, we understand it, we help make it, we can support it. We're actually in the kitchen when the soup is being made, so we know what the components are and we know what else to do with it. It's a silly way of putting it, but it is truly a matter of must be present to win and to participate in the engineering of the software. The third thing that's important to us, where we derive a tremendous amount of value, is through the diverse innovation that comes out of collaboratively developed software through a host of people that were far outside of Red Hat's organization. That broad set of global talent sparks incredible creativity, and that may also include people from an industry that are solving a specific problem that we would not have thought of solving the problem the same way. That's incredibly important to us. It also increases our development cycle, so we can get to market faster. Communities can support faster cadences than a small isolated team. It also means that time to market for innovation is decreased, so it helps the company in our competitive nature. I also want to talk about equally valuable is the customer's value of working in the upstream. And sometimes we take our customer's voice to an upstream project, but often we also bring the customer with us. So the first thing that's really beneficial to our customers is that they can have direct conversations with developers. For those that you are developers, you understand in this environment, you can have access to key contributors and people actually working on the project. So that's incredibly informative. Also, in some of today's large, complex projects that are more of infrastructure build, especially in some of the vertical markets, participation in the requirements gathering for bleeding edge projects like NFV, Edge, and IoT are a couple of examples, become an incredibly important way for them to participate in their own future. For customers of ours who are on our subscription model and our commercially supported product lands in their environment, it's incredibly beneficial to them to be able to see what's going on and looking ahead. It gets insight into where Red Hat is investing their time. They can see our developers doing the work. They can see what projects we're participating in. They can quiz us about our intentions, but you can literally see where the ball is moving. And then the fourth piece is advanced integration opportunities in the customer's environment. So as an example, we may have a customer who wants to experiment and tweak a new release before it lands as a commercially supported project. They can install that in their own environment. They can kick the tires. They can see how it works with its various systems, how it integrates into other systems they have today. They can fix a bug. they can, flag a bug, they can ask Red Hat for help, and they can also let Red Hat know where they would like to see features added in the future and give us an opportunity to make a case for being able to do that as well for the benefit of the project. Now, every year Red Hat does a survey called State of Enterprise Open Source Survey. And there was one fact that came through in this year that was surprising to me. I shouldn't have been surprised, but that was a response we got when we asked folks how likely they would be to select a vendor if they contributed to an open source, or rather how they make a decision around picking a vendor. Historically, we've had questions around, do you want a vendor that supports open source? But the last several years, we've been asking the question whether or not a vendor contributed to open source communities would actually impact or influence their decision. And we found that 83% of over 1,200 IT leaders in large companies said that made a difference. They would be more likely to select. And I thought that was not insignificant. A number of years ago, Jim Whitehurst, who used to be our CEO and is now president at IBM, had predicted that a great amount of growth in the open source industry, so to speak, in the ecosystem would come from customers engaging in projects. And we are seeing that trend in a really big way. And so, of course, if a customer is engaging themselves, they can certainly easier see the value of working with a vendor who also participates. That's become something that has clearer value. I often get asked the question, this is Red Hat's experience. I've been doing it a long time. Could you really replicate that? Could you grow a set of services around open source? Could you grow a customer base with customers in the same way? And I would say that is not outside the realm of possibility. There are so many new projects with such tremendous velocity. It's hard to believe that people would not want an organization to support them to be able to consume all that technology, to bring it into relevancy in their own space. There's really clearly value in helping enterprises in particular consume all this innovation. And I think there are going to be places for companies, the next Red Hats, to step up in those spaces. But I do want to comment, though, on a couple of observations I've made and some of the fundamentals that create the conditions that would make being able to participate in upstream communities work through a company. The first one is that Red Hat has had a long-term commitment to open source that started nearly 30 years ago, and that goes from project to product. So we don't use any proprietary software. We don't ship proprietary software. And when we acquire a company, if they have software that should see the light of day, then we make sure it's open sourced. And that's part of our process. That's part of our commitment to ship nothing out our door that isn't based on open source. There's also, I think, a second element for Red Hat, and what's led to some of their success is a continuity of leadership and vision. So everyone from an individual contributor that's working on a project to leadership understands why open source is incredibly critical to the company, and the consistency is important. And so there's no debating whether or not this is the right model, or whether or not this is the right philosophy and practice for us. And then I think the third piece is there's a consistency of strategy where we've literally borrowed all the best from open source and tried conveying that into the way we actually run the company. I mentioned Jim Whitehurst's name. He wrote a book called The Open Organization that was basically a telling of Red Hat's story and how we had used those same principles to try to create the most open organization we could. We're not perfect, but that's where we strive every day. We employ something called the Open Decision Framework, which affords an opportunity for people across the company to be able to weigh in on decisions, big decisions for the company, to understand where they come from, and it's a great model that's as inclusive as we possibly can be, to help with the direction of the company and ideas to improve, and also to create an environment where people enjoy coming to work every day. So I will say that the answer to the question is open source hard. It is a bit. I think folks here know it is. Uh, and the reason I comment on this is because it does take a commitment. And we have to, I know with Red Hat, we have to re-earn the trust of the communities we work in every day. We don't take that for granted. So again, it certainly includes consistency. Now, I'd also like to take a minute to contrast this with some not so open practices and some cautionary comments. Part of this comes from me wearing my hat always as an open source initiative board member, and also as the open source program head at Red Hat. We're in a persistent mode of educating. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to walk you through Open Core, because I get asked about Open Core. And if you're not already familiar with, I want to make sure that you recognize it when you bump into it. So Open Core is a model that involves offering core features or a limited version of software as free and open source, while offering a commercial version or add-ons as proprietary. That's a business model. That's not a software license. There are some things we want to caution about and be very clear, because sometimes Open Core is conflated with open source, and it's important to understand the distinction. The first thing is that participation is constrained with Open Core. The company will not want to enable its contributors to add features that may compete with the company's own ideas. So in that respect, it's not really an open community. Community is also devalued. They're not necessarily looked to for innovation, for the same reason you can't participate. And there's also a danger of vendor lock-in, because if you have premium features and you rely on those, you can't move off onto the next platform or system because you're locked in, which is one of the benefits of open source you miss in an open core model. And then the last piece is that deployment is constrained by design. So you may be able to use the software, but only in conditions and environments where that's okay with a vendor. One of the newer licenses, creative licenses, SSPL, server-side public license, kind of sounds like it should be an open source license, but it's not. And so just to be clear, there are restrictions, and think about that with care as you consider. Also, there's an associated concept called commercial open source software. This is just one of my little nits, but open source by definition is commercial software. The federal government actually went out of their way a few years ago to explain that to U.S. federal agencies, that it is commercial software. It's not a different kind of software. And so I always think it's redundant. So I'm just saying commercial open source software. It's just confusing. So what would I like you to take away from my talk, I hope, today? Well, first of all, you must be present to win. And I would say you can win some without being totally present, but you'll win the most if you're actually participating in upstream communities. It is, especially if you take the time to align your goals. The second thing I would like you to be aware of is as you approach open source, or whatever you're doing with that, really inspect your business motivations and make sure you build your open source strategy around it. If you can articulate that clearly, you'll bring the rest of your organization along as they understand how open source fits and what you're trying to do, and it doesn't get dismissed unintentionally as some kind of hobbyist activity, or it's something that's not really connected to the business, or it's something extra we're doing, or something or humanitarian we're doing. Just be really clear on developing a strategy, be able to articulate. You'll go a lot farther with open source if you can be really clear with yourself on how you want to participate. And then, of course, don't confuse open core with open source. I think I made the point. At any rate, that's all I have to present to you today. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you a bit, always available for questions. And now we'll move into the question portion of our presentation. Thanks.